Yeah, I mean, I watched the interview with you and the podcast that the fellow who was on there, his name is Mark. I want to say his last name correctly, Menard, right? If
Yep.
I'm not mistaken. And his podcast is called Elevation Beyond. I think it's called
Elevating Beyond.
Elevating Beyond, right?
Yeah.
With Mark Menard. And so, walk me through how this whole thing happened with you and Billy Carson, because
Right.
when you watch Billy's been at it for 14, 15 years. I think the first time, if you search up his material, you will hear he started in 2010. And he's gotten tens, if not hundreds of millions of views on many different interviews. I think even if you include TikTok, Instagram and everything combined, it's probably in the billions of views that he's gotten.
Yeah.
Until he sat down with you, but walk me through the invitation. Did Mark invite you? Did Billy invite you? How did that happen?
Yeah. So Mark invited me. He sent me a DM on Instagram the day before. So as far as I understand it, the plan was actually for Mark and Billy to interact. Mark's a Christian. So he has Christian faith and conviction, and had talked to Billy because they had been friends, talked a lot about business together and different things like that. And so they were setting up, which had sort of been in the ether for a while, to have a conversation about some of the disagreements that they had about what Billy said about Christianity, how Mark feels about Christianity. And Anton, who is Mark's media manager, had compiled a bunch of different sources that Mark could look at and kind of review in plan for this. And I'd done in some of my social media videos just some short response videos to some things that Billy had said on your podcast when you had him in, when Andrew Schultz had him on, when Joe Rogan had him on. Just quick, 2-minute things, just kind of correcting some of those errors. And so Anton put together a Google Doc of some of this stuff, me, a few other people. And how I understand it is that Mark just kind of said to Anton right before, what happens if we just reach out to Wes? Like, what happens if we just see if he can come and interact? So he reached out to me the day before. I was out at a lunch meeting with a friend and saw the message and, couldn't get down to Florida to actually do it in person, but said, I'll jump on a call. And I'm more than willing to do that and interact with Billy and kind of go back and forth with some of the claims that he's made about Christianity.
And what was your biggest takeaway when you sat down with him? What did you see that was maybe different than you had seen him on different podcasts when he's speaking? What did you sense?
I think people like Billy are very confident in the way that they say things, but that confidence isn't always backed up with the reality of the evidence. And so confidence and competence are not the same thing. And I thought what was surprising to me about my interaction with Billy was that I was expecting some sort of rebuttal. And if you watch the interaction I had with him, it's on my YouTube channel, there was no rebuttal. So we get into the topics. He claims that Jesus wasn't crucified. He kind of has these sources that he uses. He brought those up, predictably, as I thought he might. And I addressed why those sources don't work for his claim. And then he collapsed. He just said, well, the first claim was that it was from the Sinai Bible, which is Codex Sinaiticus. And I happened to have a facsimile, a photocopy of Codex Sinaiticus on my shelf. And so I simply pulled it off my shelf and said, well, do you mind telling me where you think it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there? Because this is a 4th century Greek Bible. It has the crucifixion. And so he kind of pivoted to saying, well, no, I misspoke. I actually meant the Gospel of Barnabas, which is a known forgery. And so I think my surprise was that he didn't try to double down. He just completely capitulated and then tried to move the topics onward.
So you're asking him questions because I'm watching the back and forth. You're not being aggressive and disrespectful. You kept posing questions. So may I ask where you got this source from? If you don't mind me asking, can you break this thing down for me? And he's giving his rebuttal. And what do you know about this, and that? And he would pause, and you would go and say, well, actually, I wrote a thesis on this. And the approach that you're going back and forth with him. What happened after you guys were done with the podcast?
Well, we did the podcast, and then it was very clear that Billy did not want the podcast to air. So he got in contact with Mark, and he said, this thing can't go out. and he had a couple of different reasons, w- which he verbalized, but the reasons did kind of shift. There was some talk of a debate. Well, at first he said, I didn't really understand that this was going to be as of a debate as it turned out to be, and I typically ask a fee. So he says he asked 50 grand for a debate. That was never put forth, and so it was unfair because this is his kind of standard practice, is that it costs $50,000 to debate Billy Carson. And then he brought forward that there was some sort of interaction, formal debate that was being set up with another Christian that this was interfering with. Now, I doubt that was the case. I've been part of events where debates have taken place, and why this conversation would have truly impinged on a later debate is unclear to me. But that was what he said, and so at this point, Mark and Billy are friends. They've known each other for years. They live in the same neighborhood, and so for the good faith of their friendship, Mark decides to do Billy a solid and holds on to the footage. But Mark contacted me only a couple days later and said, here's the situation, Wes. It's not going to go out. Billy doesn't want me to put it out. And I think Mark was a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that Billy didn't want it put out. And so I simply said, that's fine. It's your podcast. But I'm going to make a video and simply say that this event happened. And so that's what I did. And as things transpired, it was clear that not everything was adding up on Billy's side, but then also a lot of people were accusing me of actually making up the interaction.
Got it.
And so as that kind of took
What
place...
percentage? Your own audience?
No, just people online.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead. You're saying, here's what happened. Some people are saying, I don't know, you're just making things up. That would have never happened. Billy's strong. He would never be able to, you would never be able to hang with somebody like Billy. And
right. Yeah. And then I just kind of say to Mark as we're talking back and forth, because we're communicating throughout, the course of the aftermath of this. And I said, hey, people are accusing me of lying, of making this up. And Mark was quite uncomfortable with that. Mark was quite uncomfortable with the fact that people are accusing me of dishonesty. And so then he made a video where he said that it did happen. And in that video, he included a number of clips of the actual interaction.
But not the whole podcast.
No, he held on to the podcast for over a month.
Oh, so let me get this straight. So when was the actual interview?
October 18th.
On my birthday, October 18th. And he released it when? Because on your channel it says December 9th.
Yes.
And I don't see it on his channel anymore.
No. So what transpired was that Mark released it in November, and he released it, and it was up for less than 24 hours. In fact, I don't even think it was up for more than 6 hours.
Okay.
Because Billy showed up to Mark's house with a cease and desist letter at 2:30 in the morning.
Okay. So is this the part where there's a video of it with the Ring camera?
Yeah. Yeah. So if people are interested in this, I would recommend two sources. Anton put out a video where he kind of he chronologically lays out some of the things that led up to it, and then Mark himself, just a couple of weeks ago, put out a video where he, from his side, put out, here's my side of the story of the things that happened because Billy went to Mark's house,
okay,
with a handwritten cease and desist letter. And
a handwritten at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then what does Mark do? Mark takes it down.
So Mark took the video down. It was less, I think, in regards to Billy, more that this was just turning into something that was because of the complexity of Mark's situation. He lives in the same neighborhood. Billy's wife is friends with Mark's wife. Their boys play basketball together. Like, this is messy. This is messy for Mark on a different level than it's messy for me.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's tough because you're going to practice. I can't believe you did this. Kids are not having conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if that doesn't help. So during this time when it's up 6 hours,
mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you get the file and you say, I'm going to put it on my channel.
Well, so I had the file. One of the things that I did do when Mark said, hey, I'm just going to hold on to this. Billy's asked me to, and so I'm going to do this for the moment, is I said, two things. I'm going to put out a video. I'm going to say that this happened, and I would like you to send me a copy of it. So Mark actually did send me a copy of it, which I said, I will not put out without your permission. Now, certain things transpired where, it kind of came to light that Mark, because of the complexities of his situation, wasn't going to repost the video, but I decided to repost the video on my end on early December.
And you guys spoke, and he said, I'm going to go live with it.
I said I'm going to go live with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was his reaction when he said that?
He was fine with it. Mark has been pretty behind the scenes.
Okay.
I think on purpose and for good reasons. He's gotten a lot of flack because of some of the way that the conversation transpired with Billy. But if you ask Mark, he will say, and I think he says in his video, he was so surprised during the interaction. He's in the room with Billy, and he's very surprised that Billy, who is Mr. Confidence, Mr. Ancient Evidence, is completely collapsing. So for Billy, who usually always has the monologue, to say, well, okay, well, that's fair. Let's move on to the next topic. I think Mark was, not to speak for him, but I think he was genuinely a little bit confused. And so felt like he, to a certain degree, needed to come to Billy's aid in the course of this conversation, because he just felt the kind of secondhand embarrassment that was going on in the room because Billy was really not acting in the way that Billy usually does.
Now, let me ask you, in 14 years since he's been creating content, or he's been out there, Billy, and, he's been sharing his stories that he has, why do you think this hasn't happened for 14 years?
I mean, I think you can strategically put yourself in positions where you're not going to be put on the defense. The thing is with the internet, and I'm sure you know this as well as anybody, Patrick, that people love sensationalism. And we live in a world where we know a little about a lot, but we don't know a lot about a little. And so we live in this Wikipedia world, right? You can just hop online. You don't really need to know information. You can kind of, you can shed that out to someone else, right? You can, and someone else being basically the supercomputer in your pocket. And people love sensationalism. People like to hear the crazy story, the conspiracy theory, for, sometimes I think genuine reasons. Some conspiracy theories are true sometimes. But I think when you have people who are saying pretty outrageous things, people like to be entertained, and people like the more sensationalistic theory than the mundane one. So, I mean, in one sense, it is sensationalistic that you have this first century itinerant Jewish preacher in the backwaters of Roman-occupied Judea who predicts his own death and resurrection and then pulls it off. But I think people are so used to the biblical narrative about the historical Jesus that they want something else. It's the same reason the Da Vinci Code got so popular, even though there really wasn't anything historical behind the Da Vinci Code. But people like these kind of under-the-table conversations that are sensationalistic and make you feel like you know something special now. And so I think
exposing somebody, oh my God, Christianity's finally being exposed, that there was another guy in the past, that Jesus replicated his story because there was this person that in India, and exact same story that did this. So finally Christians are being exposed. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Or I mean, every Christmas and Easter, it seems that there's some news article about, this lost or missing gospel that has this story about Jesus.
Well, I remember Da Vinci Code was massive. And even the movie with, who was Tom Hanks in Da Vinci Code? Yeah, there was a 1 and a 2, if I'm not mistaken. Right? There was a couple of them.
Yeah.
And for a person that's not in that world, you can really get caught up in it. Now, have you had a follow-up with Billy? Like, did you guys speak? Has he reached out to you directly?
No, not to me, other than his lawyer sending me a cease and desist letter. But
was that handwritten or was that typed out?
No, that was an actual.
Well, at least he paid you respect and he typed it.
I guess so.
That's a level of respect. You're not getting a handwritten one. Maybe.
I mean, I think he eventually did send actual cease and desist letters to Mark. But
so that's fair. He has to pay respect to both people, right? So now, if there was a possibility of a part 2, right, with the two of you guys, maybe he had a bad day. Maybe he was sick that day. Maybe he had a lot on his mind. Maybe he had challenges with family, siblings, kids, other things that's going on. Sometimes people have a bad day.
Yeah.
would you be open to the idea of another one, the two of you guys together, long form, and maybe he brings somebody with him?
Yeah, I would be open to it. I mean, that was the original plan, was that this interaction that we had online would be kind of a precursor to ideally an in-person thing with Billy. And I actually said, when Billy sent me the cease and desist letter, I made a video where I said, I will actually adhere to all of the terms and conditions of this letter if you decide to run it back with me and we do it in person. Because I think Billy has a lot of claims about the Bible, and I hope that our conversation kind of made him think twice about a lot of the claims he's made about the Bible, especially the ones that are patently false and can be verified even with just a quick Google search. But I think there are still things that Billy has said about the history of Christianity, about biblical languages, that do need to be corrected, not because I have some sort of vendetta against Billy, but because I want people to know what is true. And as someone who has studied this stuff formally and does, read Hebrew and Greek, and I want people to actually know what the reality of what these things concerning the historical reliability and the truthfulness and the verisimilitude of the Bible actually are.
Wes, let me ask you. I'm on your channel right now. And I'm just kind of wondering who else you react to, right? Who else would be somebody where you would say is like a Billy Carson that, shares certain stories that, has caught some traction? Who else would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm actually scheduled to do an online event with a guy named Aaron Abke, who is a growing individual within. I think Aaron has more kind of, his repertoire is a little bit more than Billy's. But my friend Stephen Boyce, who has a PhD and is brilliant on church history, and I think his PhD research was actually on Gnostic Gospels. Him and I are going to do an interaction with Aaron and another individual as well. But I mean, off the top of my head, no one necessarily comes to mind, but there are. I mean, the internet is kind of a wild, wild west with this stuff and just claims that are made. I mean, I think it's emblematic in this conversation. We live in this world, but we live in a world where social media has kind of designed it where we're so used to claims being thrown out, but claims are not actual evidence. And so you can make a claim where you say something and, because it's, in 140 characters, and we're so used to that, we think that that's actually rationale, but that's not rationale. That's an assertion. An assertion is kind of like the roof of the building. You don't start building the building by the roof. That's the last thing to go on top. The foundation, the walls, everything internal, that's the rationale and the evidence, and then you put the assertion on top. But we live in this world where everybody's throwing out assertions, and we've actually forgotten how to articulate what evidence and reasons and rationale actually are. So that's what we see online.
I mean, a question about, I remember back in the days when a friend of mine who we went to high school with, I go to the Army, I come out. This is a guy that was a PCP guy, troublemaker. All of a sudden, he's no longer cursing. He's not drinking. He's not going to the clubs. I said, what's going on with you? And him and I both had a 1.8 GPA in high school. Both of us were troubled teenagers. We were just, we had a hard time. And I went to the military. He went a different route. And he says, Pat, I found Jesus. I said, you found who? He says, I found Jesus. I said, there's no way you found Jesus. He said, I found Jesus. I'm laughing at him, thinking what do you mean you found Jesus? He said, well, what are you doing next Friday? I says, I'm at the club. What are you doing next week? You want to go to the club? Let's go. He said, no, I want to take you to a different club. What's that? Church of the Paznaz of Pasadena, California. I'm like, oh, give me a break, dude. I'm not in. I'm busy. And he keeps trying. Finally, I go on a Friday night. And it's a Bible study with 5 of us from 6 to 2 o'clock in the morning, okay, Friday night. And we start kind of going through this process. And the teacher was a guy that knew a lot about philosophy, so he can go philosophy. He can talk maybe on the philosophy side, on the business side, and he can talk on the spiritual side. So different religions, denominations, what questions you got? What are you struggling? What are you battling with? And it was very interesting to see. You got the FAQs that you go through. typical objections that have come up about, why if God is real, how can he have something like this happen? How can let so many innocent, the most innocent objections, like in every business, there's
Sure, yeah.
innocent objections that comes up. And then eventually it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And only somebody that went to school and maybe has studied this like for many, many years, then realizes, okay, now you're asking some real heavy questions that we got to sit there and process with. How many people you think of somebody that went to school and got their, degree from certain universities that we have in America could have sat down with Billy and not exposed, but revealed the number of leaks in his arguments? How many people would be able to do something like that? Somebody that studied theology.
Oh, I think quite a few.
And what's that number like? Is it in the tens of thousands? Was it things that was not level of depth that anybody could have overcame? That's
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that the accusations that Billy was making, they're not unusual in the sense of, and I'm not really sure where Billy got a lot of the arguments that he actually articulates from, because like I said, Wikipedia articles could debunk him. Like you look on, he uses something like the Gospel of the Holy 12 for his evidence. Well, the Gospel of the Holy 12 on the Wikipedia article will tell you this is a 20th century forgery. Like we don't have any evidence before the 20th century. It was designed by a group that was trying to prove that Jesus was a vegetarian. But it's not a historical document. And so if we're going off of something like the Gospel of the Holy 12 or the Gospel of Barnabas, which is the one he uses for the denial of the crucifixion.
Let's go through one of them. Let's start with the first one, Rob, if you want to go to that. So the Gospel of the Holy 12.
Yeah. So there you go. So the Gospel of the Holy 12, first serialized in the Lindsay and Lincolnshire Star newspaper between July 30th, 1898 and March 10th, 1901. Presents vegetarian versions of traditional teachings and events described in the canonical New Testament. So this isn't something that has historical provenance. So it's not something that has kind of a paper trail going back into the ancient world. There are ancient apocryphal documents that you could capitalize on. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Peter, but this is not one of them. So to choose this as your document to prove something, I'm just not entirely sure why you would go about that particular route. Or the other one is the Gospel of Barnabas, which is the one that Billy brought up with me, which is a clear middle-age forgery. It's not, and that's not a contested fact. It paraphrases Dante's Inferno. It has glaring historical inaccuracies. It has geographical mistakes. It says that Jesus is the Messiah, but he's not the Christ, indicating that the author had no idea what those two words meant and that they were the same words in different languages. So do you actually try to go, when you hear him say these things, let me see where he got these things from? Is that where you go? Are you going and saying, I don't know how he came up to the conclusion of this. Is it this book? Is it this fiction book? Did you go that route yourself, or how do you try to break down his arguments? Yeah, I think it's a both-and situation. I think Billy's unusual in that he has brought forward arguments that I've never seen before. So usually you get kind of the typical arguments that are repeated, and sometimes it's repeated ad nauseum. Accusations of the Council of Nicaea in 325, inventing the books of the Bible as the canon of Scripture. That's the sort of Da Vinci Code-esque argument. And you can trace where the paper trail of that goes to, because you can see that Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code got it from a previous book called Holy Blood and Holy Grail, and Holy Blood and Holy Grail appears to have got it from Voltaire, who used a document called the Synodicon Vetus. So there's actual links to where, okay, this is a false statement, but where's the false statement coming from?
Right.
And you can see the dots and connect them. With something like using the Gospel of the Holy 12 or the accusation that Billy uses for the Sinai Bible, Codex Sinaiticus, denying the crucifixion, I think I can come up with a theory as to how he developed that, which is based on a misunderstanding of a textual variant at the end of the Gospel of Mark that is in Codex Vaticanus. Or sorry, not Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus. But to then repeat this constantly and say that the crucifixion isn't in the Codex Sinaiticus entirely, I'm not sure why he would go about that or where kind of the reasoning came from. As far as I can tell, a lot of these are original to Billy, and they sound sensationalistic. And a lot of people don't have the repertoire or the background to know what something like Codex Sinaiticus is. And so when he's throwing that out to you, or he's throwing that out to Andrew Schultz, or he's throwing that out to Joe Rogan, it's not in your like categories of information that you just kind of have off the top of your head. So you just kind of take it at face value, right? But if you take a seminary Greek class, it wouldn't be unusual to even open up Codex Sinaiticus, because it's all digitized. You can go to codexsinaiticus.org and see the document and actually practice translating some Greek from Codex Sinaiticus, because it is a prominent Greek manuscript. So it's a combination of a few things where you have certain arguments that are repeated, often enough and loud enough online that they kind of, people in their minds, it becomes true. And then you have other arguments that are more novel. And I find Billy's arguments are more novel than they're not. He does kind of throw in the Vatican is behind everything, and the Council of Nicaea and the books of the Bible, and Constantine is another one that kind of gets pegged on Constantine for some reason. But there are other things, like a lot of what he talked about with you, that I think are, as far as I can tell, Billy originals.
Billy originals.
I think so. In as far as
meaning nobody else talked about it. It's just his own assumption that I think this is what's going on,
or the way that they're formulated. So I think like Muslims have capitalized on the Gospel of Barnabas, because the Gospel of Barnabas appears to actually have been influenced by Islam in the Middle Ages, and uses some sort of typical later Islamic arguments from the Middle Ages, and does deny the crucifixion. So it has been capitalized on that way. But the way that it's been used by someone like Billy, I think at minimum it's novel, because I haven't seen it in the same way that Billy has articulated it.